When you see those kind of conditions, do you feel ashamed that people in this country are having to live like that?
Yes.
The question that often they ask is, why is no one listening to us?
Well, I think your work, the work of activists like Kwasi Twenenbua and others, have highlighted a situation which we promised to fix 4 years ago and which we haven't. The Grenfell tragedy was a tragedy of many dimensions. One of the things that everyone pledged to do afterwards was to make sure that people in social housing had their voices heard. And we haven't done that effectively. Now, we're proposing to introduce legislation. Part of that legislation is making sure that complaints are heard and acted on more quickly. But what you showed there is unacceptable and indefensible. And looking at the documentary work that you've done, looking at the circumstances that people in Regina Avenue in Croydon live in, you can't defend that. And I'm not blaming the local authority, I'm not blaming individuals, but it's a collective effort that we need to make to change things.
The question really we have asked in this whole investigation is how it has come to this. You've been in this department a few months now, but you've been a government minister for a long time. How has this been allowed to happen? Why do you think we have led ourselves to this position where people are living like this?
Well, I think there are multiple factors. I think some of it relates to the quality of housing that's been built in the past. I think that there were decisions that were made about how people should be housed, which reflected an attitude that was patronising, bordering on callous. And I think subsequent to that, it's also been the case that people in local government and people in housing associations have been under a degree of pressure for all sorts of reasons, as many aspects of the public sector have. But I think it's also the case that the work that Grenfell United and other activists have done have demonstrated to us some of the things that we can do in order to make things better. So the first thing is appropriate regulation. The second thing is making sure that complaints are heard and investigated. The third thing is making sure that housing associations and other registered social landlords live up to their responsibilities. And the fourth thing is, as you say, an effective tenant's voice. All of those things are part of the legislation that we want to bring forward, and they're all part of the solution.
You talked a few things there. One thing I want to pick you up on is the regulator. We have a regulator of social housing that can't visit people's homes and can't speak to tenants when they complain, yet they can speak to the landlord. That again, your government put that regulator in place. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
Well, it's certainly the case that we're going to change the way in which the regulator operates. That's the whole point of the
but why was it ever set up in that way, that you have a regulator that can't speak to tenants but it can speak to landlords?
Well, I asked myself that question, and I don't know why that mistake was made. One of the striking things...
Your government?
Yeah.
2011?
Yeah, one of the striking things that I watched in the wake of Grenfell was a very moving documentary which showed the engagement of Grenfell's residents with the tenant management organisation and with the local authority before the fire. And again, I don't want to criticise individuals, but they were concerned about the way in which Ryden Homes and others were essentially repairing or reconstructing or renovating that building. Their voices just weren't heard. And knowing what we know now, it's worse than shocking. It's unbelievable. So I don't think that one should try to defend mistakes that were made in the past. We shouldn't condemn. What we should do is learn and pledge to do better.
You talked about reforms. We are waiting for the social housing white paper to be brought to Parliament to put into law. Two questions on that. Firstly, when will that be put into law? When will these promises that were made after Grenfell for reform in this area be put into law?
We're hoping to publish the detail of what will be in the bill in March, and then we hope to introduce the bill in the new Queen's speech, which will be in May or June of this year.
The second question is, where is the urgency here? Grenfell was 2017. We are nearly 5 years on. You've been in post now for a few months. Surely this should have been the first thing you did. You walked into this department and said, we made promises after Grenfell and we have not kept them, and it's the first thing I'm going to do.
The very first thing that I did was to make sure that we deal with the immediate building safety crisis. So as your work has brought out, there are a range of problems facing people in social housing, and indeed in the rented sector and in the leasehold sector as well. The most urgent problem is dealing with the worst cases of unsafe buildings. That's been the absolute first priority. But in a way, it's like being a doctor coming into an accident and emergency ward. There are people who are suffering. You have to put your attention towards the most acute problems, but then you've got to work through, because your job is to alleviate that suffering and to make sure that people can lead decent lives.
If this was an A&E department, how much of a state was it in? How chaotic was it when you walked in?
I think it was tough. That's because of an accumulated set of problems. But I think that, again, if you're a doctor walking into A&E, you don't question why people are there when you've got to get stuck in order to try to improve things. So yes, of course, there are longer term factors at work here. But in the meantime, my view is, resolve the building safety crisis as much as possible, help leaseholders and other people who are facing bills, and also let's make sure that the voices of people in social housing are properly heard. And one of the things in the Levelling Up white paper that we published was a commitment to extending the number of homes that meet the decent home standard, and also reviewing that standard as well, in order to make sure that it's not simply a way of housing associations or the government patting itself on the head and saying, we've done a good job, just making sure that it is actually appropriate for the circumstances in which people need to live.
You've spoken about the need to build more social homes. In this country last year, fewer than 6,000 social homes were built in Britain. By any measurement, that is a failure, isn't it?
It's nowhere near enough. No, we've got to do better. Again, I don't want to criticise my predecessors, because they were operating under constraints, but the Chancellor's made available a significant amount of money, more than £11 billion, in order to increase the number of affordable homes. It's also the case that we need to look at the planning system and make sure that developers play their part as well. When you get planning permission, and you're building new homes for sale, there are significant profits to be made. A slice of that has gone in the past and must go in the future to making sure that there are more social homes for rent.
Until more social homes are built, and it is social housing, I know your predecessors have spoken about affordable housing, but social housing is the most affordable form of housing. Until we build more social housing, people are stuck in the cycle, aren't they?
Yes.
Of being evicted, trying to find somewhere, rents going up, stuck in poor quality housing. When can you commit to having more social homes being built? Are we going to be building a lot more social homes under your tenure?
Yes, that's our intent.
How many more? Because last year we had fewer than 6,000.
Well, one of the things that we're doing now is looking at how we can allocate the money that we've been given in order to precisely to achieve that goal. And we're also looking at reforms, as I say, to the planning system in order to increase that number. So I haven't set myself or the department a target, but we have a mission, which is to increase the number of social homes and to also help people move out of the private rented sector and then into home ownership progressively, because we need homes of every type of tenure. There are people who simply can't afford to buy homes. We need to make sure that they're living somewhere decent, and the socially rented sector is critical to that. But it's also the case that there'll be people in social housing who can build up savings over time, whom we can help into ownership as well. But the key thing is to reduce the number of people in the private rented sector, to have a healthy social rented sector, and to help more people into partial or full ownership.
With all due respect, I know you say you want to build more social housing. I mean, it's pretty difficult to build less. I mean, less than 6,000 is pretty dire. And I know you're saying we're not going to set ourselves a target, but isn't that a slight cop-out here? Because you are going to build more than 6,000 if you just start trying to build more. So isn't actually setting yourself a target a sensible thing to do? Shelter say 90,000 are needed every year to meet with demand. Is that the kind of figure you want to see achieved?
Well, at the moment, I'm in the process of assessing what's capable of being delivered, and what I want to do is to be able to spell out both the pathway to building more social homes and also metrics along the way so people can see what our progress is. And of course, organisations like Shelter, who've been campaigning, have made I think a very fair judgment of the likely level of need. But I can't commit today to saying that there's going to be a specific target, because again, one of the things that sometimes breeds cynicism in politics is if you have very ambitious targets and then they're not met. So I would prefer to be realistic, which I hope we will be in due course. And if we fall short of what Shelter and others say is necessary, then of course we'll try to do better. But I think it's more appropriate to say this is what's deliverable and this is the way we're going to do it.
You are the 5th Housing Secretary in 6 years. and plenty of people have sat in this office, I've been in here before with your predecessor, and made promises along for social housing tenants, and they've not been met. What makes you different to them?
I wouldn't want to compare myself to any of my predecessors. All I would say is that people have a right to be sceptical, given the length of time that's elapsed since the Grenfell tragedy and where we are now. All I would ask is that people judge the government fairly on what we do in the next 2 years.
Do you think you get this? Because tenants watch government responses like this, these interviews.
Sure.
They live in the houses I've shown you, and then they watch these interviews, and their response to us is they just don't get it.
No, well,
do you get it?
I'm not going to try and make any special claims for myself. It's actions that count. So ultimately, I'm on probation. You and your viewers and the people whose plight that you've highlighted have every right to be sceptical about promises. They've had promises from politicians of different parties, from people in housing associations and councils. They want action. That's what I want to try to concentrate on. If I fail, then people will judge me on that basis. If I succeed in moving the dial, it's because it's a team effort, and a team effort in which the people you've given a voice to will have played the most prominent part.
And finally, will you come out and meet some of these tenants? Will you come and speak to them and in their homes and see the kind of conditions they're living in?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there is any substitute for hearing direct from people and understanding what really needs to change on the basis of the experiences they've been through.